In 1997, the foothills of Northern California were a postcard of American life, the gold country they called it, a place of rolling hills, historic towns, and a quiet sense of peace. People knew their neighbors, they left their doors unlocked. But that autumn, a shadow began to creep across this idyllic landscape, a cold and nameless fear that whispered on the wind. It was a feeling at first, a sense that something was wrong, that the familiar roads and quiet corners held a new and terrible secret. No one could have known that this unsettling feeling was the harbinger of a horror story about to unfold, one that would stain the region's memory forever, and introduce a name that would become synonymous with pure, calculated evil. It started with whispers, rumors of attacks, stories that seemed too dark to be true, too monstrous for this peaceful corner of the world. Young women spoke of a van, a friendly couple, and then, a sudden violent turn. The stories were fragmented, scattered across different towns and counties, making them difficult to connect. But the fear was real, a palpable thing that changed the way people lived. A young woman walking home would glance over her shoulder. A parent would hold their child's hand a little tighter. The very air seemed to crackle with a new and unwelcome tension, a sense of vulnerability that hadn't been there before. The gold country's innocence was being stolen piece by predators no one had yet seen. You see, evil often wears a mask of normalcy. It can smile, it can offer a ride, it can look like a friendly couple just trying to be helpful. And that was the most terrifying part of what was happening. The threat wasn't a monster lurking in the shadows of a dark alley. It was a monster hiding in plain sight, driving the same highways, shopping in the same stores. This predator, or predators as it would turn out, understood the power of trust. They knew how to disarm their victims with a kind word and a welcoming gesture, turning the very fabric of community into a weapon. It was a twisted kind of genius, a predatory instinct honed to a razor's edge. And so, as the leaves turned from green to gold that year, a different kind of season was beginning. A season of fear. The local police departments were getting calls, strange reports that didn't quite add up. But soon, those scattered reports would coalesce into a single terrifying narrative. A single event would tear the veil of secrecy away, exposing the brutal reality of the danger that had taken root in their community. The story of James Daveggio and Michaud was about to begin, and for many, its beginning would mark the end of everything they knew. The shadow was no longer just a feeling. It was about to take a horrifying human form. It was a cold November night, the kind of night where the darkness on a lonely highway feels absolute. And on the side of a road near Sacramento, a young woman stumbled into the glare of headlights, her life hanging by a thread. She was beaten, terrified, and had just escaped a nightmare. She told a story that sounded like something from a horror film. A van, a man and a woman, a sudden, brutal attack. She had been abducted, assaulted, and left for dead. But she didn't die. She fought back, she survived, and she ran. Her survival was a miracle, but it was also something more. It was a beginning. A turning point. The young woman's harrowing account gave police their first solid lead. Before this, they had only whispers and disconnected reports. Now, they had a witness. A survivor who could describe her attackers and their vehicle. She spoke of a white van, a seemingly ordinary vehicle turned into a mobile prison. She described the man, his face etched in her memory. And she described the woman, his partner in cruelty, an accomplice who was just as vicious, just as involved. The details were shocking, but they were concrete. They were the first threads investigators could pull on to unravel a much larger, darker tapestry of crime. The survivor's courage had just lit a beacon in the dark. This single, brave act of survival galvanized law enforcement. Suddenly, the scattered reports from across the region started to make sense. The Placer County Sheriff's Department realized they weren't dealing with isolated incidents. They were hunting a team, a predator couple who were working together, using a friendly facade to lure young women into their trap. The description of the white van and the couple became the central focus of a massive investigation. Task forces were formed, bulletins were sent out, and officers across Northern California began to connect the dots. The fear that had been simmering in the community now had a face. The investigation was a race against time. Everyone knew it. The couple had tried to kill their last victim. They had failed, but they wouldn't stop. They were escalating. The survivor from that highway had given the police a chance, a precious window of opportunity to find these predators before they could strike again. The question hanging over every detective, every officer, was a heavy one. Where would they turn up next? And would they be able to stop them before another young woman fell victim to the horrors hidden inside that innocuous white van? The hunt was on, and the stakes could not have been higher. The task force, a mix of local detectives and FBI agents, faced a daunting puzzle. The attacks were spread across multiple jurisdictions: Placer County, Sacramento, the Bay Area. It was a classic challenge for law enforcement predators who crossed county lines, leaving a fragmented trail of evidence and traumatized victims in their wake. The key was collaboration. Detectives began sharing files, comparing notes on every reported assault or suspicious encounter involving a couple in a van. They painstakingly compiled a timeline, mapping out where and when the attacks occurred. A pattern began to emerge, a chilling geography of terror that snaked through the quiet communities of Northern California. The breakthrough came from connecting the seemingly unconnected. An assault in one town shared an almost identical method of operation, the MO, with an abduction in another. The description of the couple, though sometimes varied in the panic of the moment, had core similarities. The man was often described as charismatic, but with a coldness in his eyes. The woman, his accomplice, played the part of a friend, a safe presence, right up until the moment the trap was sprung. Investigators realized they were dealing with a sophisticated team that had rehearsed their roles. They were hunting not just criminals, but performers in a deadly play. The FBI brought in their behavioral analysis unit, the famed profilers from Quantico. They studied the details of the crimes, building a psychological portrait of the duo they were hunting. The profile suggested a dominant, controlling male and a submissive but willing female partner. It pointed to a couple with a shared twisted fantasy they were acting out again and again. This psychological blueprint was crucial. It helped investigators understand the why behind the what. It told them that this wasn't about money or simple violence. It was about power, control, and a depraved form of intimacy shared between the two killers. This web of terror was woven with a terrifying logic. The couple seemed to choose their victims at random, preying on young women who were alone and vulnerable. A girl walking home from a friend's house, a young woman whose car had broken down. They exploited moments of everyday misfortune, turning them into opportunities for unspeakable violence. The police and FBI, working day and night, knew they were in a desperate chase. Every new piece of information, every shared report, was another strand in the web they were building to catch the spiders at its center. They just had to hope they could close the net in time. So, who were the two people at the center of this storm of fear? James Tony Daveggio was a man with a long and troubled history. He was a career criminal, a man who had spent a significant portion of his adult life behind bars. His record was a litany of offenses, from theft and parole violations to more violent crimes. He was charismatic on the surface, able to charm and manipulate those around him. But beneath that veneer was a deep-seated rage and a predatory nature. Daveggio saw other people, particularly women, as objects for his use and disposal. He was a man without a conscience, a walking embodiment of narcissistic evil. His partner in this horrific spree was Michelle Lynn Michaud. Her path to becoming a serial predator was different, but no less disturbing. Michaud had her own troubled past marked by instability and poor choices. But when she met Tony Daveggio, she found something she had seemingly been looking for. A dominant figure who gave her a sense of purpose, however twisted. She became utterly devoted to him, a willing participant in his darkest fantasies. She wasn't just a follower, she was an active and eager accomplice. She played her role with chilling effectiveness, luring victims with a friendly female face, making them feel safe right before the nightmare began. Their relationship was a toxic fusion of two broken personalities. Daveggio was the clear leader, the sadist who orchestrated the attacks. Michaud was his loyal enabler, his partner who shared in the planning, the execution, and the depraved thrill of it all. It was a folie à deux, a shared madness. Together they created a feedback loop of depravity, each one pushing the other further into the abyss. He provided the violent ideology, and she provided the crucial element of deception that made their crimes possible. Their bond was not one of love in any recognizable sense, but of a shared obsession with power, control, and cruelty. This wasn't a case of a master manipulating a pawn, it was a partnership. Michaud was not an unwilling victim of Daveggio's influence. She was a co-conspirator. She helped him select victims. She participated in their torture. She was, by all accounts, as deeply invested in their horrific acts as he was. This reality made the case all the more chilling. The idea of a lone predator is terrifying enough. But a predator couple, a team working in perfect brutal harmony, represented a new and more complex dimension of evil. They were a self-contained unit of terror, feeding off each other's pathology as they carved a path of destruction through the lives of innocent people. The heart of Daveggio and Michaud's operation was their vehicle, a white Dodge Ram van. To the outside world, it was just another work van, anonymous and easily overlooked. But on the inside, it was something else entirely. It was a meticulously customized mobile torture chamber. Daveggio, with a chilling sense of purpose, had modified the van for one reason: to facilitate the abduction, imprisonment, and assault of their victims. The vehicle was not just transportation, it was an integral part of their criminal ritual, the stage on which their horrific fantasies were acted out. It was a prison on wheels, designed to control, terrify, and silence anyone unlucky enough to be lured inside. The modifications were both crude and terrifyingly effective. Daveggio had soundproofed the rear of the van, lining the walls and ceiling with insulation and paneling. This was done to muffle the screams of their victims, ensuring that no one on the outside would hear the horror unfolding within. He installed heavy-duty locks and deadbolts on the inside of the rear doors, operable only from the front. Once a victim was inside, there was no escape. The windows were blacked out, plunging the back of the van into perpetual darkness, a disorienting and terrifying environment designed to break a person's will. Inside this dark, soundproof box, they assembled a collection of tools for their terrible trade. The van was equipped with restraints, ropes, chains, and handcuffs. They kept a toolbox filled with instruments of pain. It was a kit carefully curated to inflict maximum suffering and terror. Every item in the van had a purpose, a role to play in their sadistic script. The level of premeditation was staggering. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous act of violence. This was a calculated and planned operation, and the van was their primary instrument, a rolling testament to their dedication to cruelty. This transformation of an ordinary vehicle into a tool of horror speaks volumes about the minds of Daveggio and Michaud. It demonstrates a level of planning and foresight that is deeply unsettling. They didn't just commit crimes, they built a system for committing them. The van allowed them to be mobile, to strike in different locations and then disappear. It gave them a private, controlled space where they held absolute power over their victims. For the young women who were forced into that van, it was a portal to another world. A world of darkness, pain, and unimaginable fear. A world from which few were meant to return. To understand the twisted psychology of Daveggio and Michaud, one must look at their role models. They were not just random, disorganized killers, they were students of a sort, students of murder. Specifically, they were obsessed with another infamous serial killer couple, Gerald and Charlene Gallego. The Gallegos had terrorized Sacramento in the late 1970s, abducting and murdering young women, often using a van in a chillingly similar fashion. They became known as the sex slave slayers, and their story was one of gruesome local lore. For most, the Gallegos were a nightmare from the past. For Daveggio and Michaud, they were an inspiration. Daveggio, in particular, seemed to idolize Gerald Gallego. He saw in Gallego a model for his own predatory ambitions. He studied their methods, their mistakes, and their mythology. This wasn't a passive interest. It was an active emulation. Daveggio and Michaud sought to recreate the Gallegos' reign of terror to become the new king and queen of a dark and violent kingdom. They were, in a sense, copycat killers, but they were adding their own unique and brutal signature to the script. The parallels were undeniable. The couple dynamic, the use of a van as a love nest for murder, the targeting of young women. This obsession gave their crimes a second, more sinister layer. They weren't just killing for the act itself. They were killing for the narrative. They were trying to write themselves into the dark annals of true crime history. They wanted the infamy. They wanted to be remembered, to be feared, just like the Gallegos. This desire for notoriety fueled their brutality, pushing them to commit acts that were ever more depraved. They were performing for an imaginary audience, and perhaps for each other, casting themselves as the lead villains in a real-life horror story of their own making. This connection to the Gallego case provided investigators with a crucial psychological insight. It helped them understand the couple's motivation and predict their behavior. They were dealing with killers who had a script, a template for their actions. The profilers at the FBI could see the pattern clearly. This was about more than violence. It was about legacy. A legacy of pain and fear. The chilling realization was that Daveggio and Michaud weren't just repeating history, they were trying to surpass it, to become even more infamous than the monsters they so admired. Their crimes were an echo of a past nightmare, amplified into a new and terrifying roar. The autumn of 1997 was marked by a series of brutal attacks that left a trail of anguish across Northern California. The timeline of Daveggio and Michaud's spree was terrifyingly compressed, a whirlwind of violence that began in October and escalated rapidly. Their method was consistent and cruel. They would spot a young woman alone, often in a moment of vulnerability. Michaud would initiate contact, her friendly demeanor disarming the target. She might ask for directions or help, creating a pretext for the victim to approach their van. Once the young woman was close, Daveggio would strike, forcing her into the back of their mobile prison. One of the earliest known attacks in this final spree occurred in the Bay Area. A young woman was abducted and subjected to a horrific ordeal inside the van before being dumped, barely alive, miles from where she was taken. She survived, but the physical and psychological scars would last a lifetime. Her story, and others like it, began to paint a terrifying picture for law enforcement. Each survivor who came forward, each piece of testimony, added another brushstroke to the portrait of the couple they were hunting. The details were harrowing. The darkness of the van, the coldness of the attackers, the systematic nature of the violence. The attacks were not confined to one area. The couple roamed, moving from the urban sprawl of the Bay Area to the quieter suburban streets of Sacramento and the rural roads of the Sierra foothills. This mobility was part of their strategy, designed to confuse law enforcement and make them harder to track. For the public, it created a pervasive sense of dread. The threat felt like it could be anywhere. A trip to the grocery store, a walk home from school, a stalled car on the highway, any moment of ordinary life could suddenly turn into a life-or-death struggle. The randomness of their victim selection was one of the most terrifying aspects of their reign. Each attack followed a similar nightmarish pattern of abduction, assault, and disposal. Daveggio and Michaud seemed to derive a shared pleasure from the utter domination and terrorization of their victims. For them, it was a ritual. But for the women who endured it, it was an experience that shattered their sense of safety and changed their lives forever. The trail of anguish they left behind was not just a police file, it was a collection of broken lives, of families plunged into crisis, and of communities gripped by a fear they had never known before. And the worst was yet to come. On a cold day in early December 1997, the search for a missing young woman came to a devastating end. The body of 22-year-old Vanessa Lei Samson was found near a remote, snow-dusted reservoir in the mountains of Placer County. She had been missing for over a week. Vanessa was a bright, vibrant young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She had been abducted from a street in Pleasanton, more than 100 miles away, while walking home from her job at a local bakery. Her disappearance had sparked a frantic search, but now, the worst fears of her family and friends were realized in the most brutal way imaginable. The discovery of Vanessa's body was a turning point in the investigation. It was confirmation that the predators the police were hunting were not just assailants, they were murderers. The crime scene told a story of a horrific final struggle. Investigators worked meticulously, braving the cold and the snow, to collect every possible shred of evidence from the scene. They knew that Vanessa held the key to catching her killers. The quiet dignity of the remote location stood in stark contrast to the violence that had taken place there. It was a sacred duty for the investigators to make sure her death would lead to justice. And then came the breakthrough. A forensic miracle. Crime scene technicians discovered a tiny piece of evidence on Vanessa's body. A single, unique fiber. It was a synthetic fiber, reddish-orange in color. This was not just any fiber, it was specific, unusual. The FBI's crime lab went to work, analyzing its composition. They determined it was a type of shag carpet, popular in the 1970s, but not common now. At the same time, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. A partial fingerprint, belonging to a known criminal with a long rap sheet, James Daveggio, was lifted from evidence connected to one of the earlier, non-fatal attacks. The net was beginning to close. The two pieces of evidence, the fingerprint and the fiber, were the smoking guns investigators had been desperately searching for. The fingerprint gave them a name, Daveggio. His criminal history and known associates led them to his partner, Michaud, and the unusual fiber gave them something to look for. It was a physical link, a tangible piece of the crime scene that they could potentially tie directly to the killer's environment. The final brutal act against Vanessa Samson had tragically ended her life, but it had also provided the crucial clues that would finally put an end to the couple's reign of terror. Armed with a name and a critical piece of forensic evidence, police tracked James Daveggio and Michaud to a motel in Reno, Nevada. On December 4, 1997, a SWAT team descended on the motel, taking the couple by surprise. They were arrested, without a fight. The reign of terror was over, but the most damning evidence was yet to be found. Parked outside the motel was the white Dodge van. When investigators opened its doors, it was as if they had stepped into the heart of the nightmare. The van was exactly as the survivors had described it, a rolling torture chamber. Inside, they found the physical proof that would seal the couple's fate. They found the restraints, the tools, and the soundproofing. And they found the carpet. In the back of the van was a swath of cheap, reddish-orange shag carpeting. It was a perfect match to the single, tiny fiber found on the body of Vanessa Samson. It was the undeniable link between the killers, their van, and their final, murdered victim. Police also found a chilling collection of items belonging to their victims: jewelry, clothing, identification, kept as trophies, macabre souvenirs of their horrific deeds. The contents of the van told a silent, horrifying story of all that had happened within its walls. The trial of James Daveggio and Michaud was a harrowing ordeal for everyone involved. One by one, the survivors took the stand. With incredible courage, they faced their attackers in court and recounted the horrors they had endured. Their testimony was powerful, raw, and utterly convincing. They provided the human story behind the physical evidence, giving a voice to the pain and suffering the couple had inflicted. The families of Vanessa Samson and other victims also testified, speaking of the bright lives that had been stolen and the profound loss that would forever shadow their own. The courtroom was a theater of grief and courage. In the end, the evidence was overwhelming. The survivor testimonies, the forensic links, the contents of the van, and the couple's own chilling statements painted an undeniable picture of guilt. In 2002, both James Daveggio and Michaud were found guilty of kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. The jury, having heard the full, horrifying scope of their crimes, sentenced both of them to death. Justice, in its final, solemn form, was delivered. The case stands as a stark warning about the terrifying potential of predatory partnerships and the dark alliances that can form between broken souls. But it also stands as a testament to the incredible bravery of survivors who speak out, whose courage in the face of unimaginable trauma is often the first and most crucial step in bringing the monsters out of the darkness and into the light.